I've done philosophy really in earnest over the last 8 years. I have interiorized a lot of what I've learnt, and it's not so much propositional knowledge. I don't have 1,000 facts that I know that the ordinary person doesn't know. It's more that I just have a different way of seeing the world now. I'm not going to lose that when I stop studying philosophy in a formal context, and that's a beautiful thing. So I just thought I would come on camera and actually do a more concrete update on how my PhD is going. So if you don't know, I'm Lou. I'm doing a PhD in philosophy at the University of Cambridge. I work on Immanuel Kant's moral psychology, and my PhD is basically on Kant's account of moral exemplars. Basically, people who exhibit the moral law in their actions and behaviour. I have now written 2 chapters of my PhD, and the idea is really that my PhD is going to have 3 or 4 chapters bookended by an introduction and a conclusion. I'm not aiming to write a particularly long thesis, and Cambridge doesn't require that we write long theses, which is merciful. How is the PhD going, Lou? It's going pretty well. When I started my PhD, I still had this need to identify myself or be identified by others as a philosopher or as a budding philosopher. Something that comes with maturity, or maybe even just doing philosophy right, is that as time goes on and you advance in years and in moral sophistication, you care so much less about the identity of being a philosopher. And I think it's this move in particular that's given me the freedom of mind to look at philosophy as a vocation and really just sort of think, it doesn't matter whether I do this with my entire life. I don't need to feel like a philosopher, to feel like I've engaged philosophically with really important questions from the start. When I started philosophy, I got into it because I felt like within my study of literature, I was always coming up against a kind of wall, and that wall was really a kind of boundary where literary analysis came to an end and more conceptual questions began. I came to philosophy wanting to understand virtue and wanting to understand what makes an action right. Questions that were just really just pertinent to my relationships at the time. There's a kind of thought in philosophy that you basically work on the thing that you understand the least. It's particularly amusing when you come into contact with people who are trying to figure out whether torture is wrong. This isn't obvious to everybody, if you can quite believe it. I basically came into philosophy wanting to know and wanting a conceptual apparatus and a vocabulary that would enable me to understand people, essentially. It's interesting because I think throughout my philosophical studies, I've really just been very much interested in philosophical psychology and moral psychology, and just wanting to know how we as people become better. Through my study of Immanuel Kant, which is now coming to real fruition in my PhD, I am finally undertaking a project which is basically on moral education, and it asks, how do we come to know about duty? How do we come to know what is required of us? That's basically what my PhD is on. I don't think I'll be sad to leave philosophy behind once my PhD is over. I feel like it's been I think the truth is, it's not something I'm leaving behind. That's the kind of important point. I've done philosophy really in earnest over the last 8 years. I have interiorized a lot of what I've learnt, and it's not so much propositional knowledge. I don't have 1,000 facts that I know that the ordinary person doesn't know. It's more that I just have a different way of seeing the world now. I'm not going to lose that when I stop studying philosophy in a formal context, and that's a beautiful thing. The PhD is going well. I'm really enjoying it, and can I just say, in case it isn't actually clear, I love research. Part of what makes me sad about not wanting to pursue an academic career necessarily is that while I'm not particularly interested in teaching, I absolutely love my topic of research, and every time I come back to my PhD and I open up my PhD documents, even though it might be a complete mental scramble for me to try and figure out all the pieces of the jigsaw, and they are complicated as hell and really challenging to put together. I love the challenge. I love philosophical puzzles. I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't, and I don't think I'd finish if I didn't actually just really relish the challenge of making sense of Kantian moral education and answering really challenging questions in moral psychology and in ethics more generally about how, as people, we get better, we become better people. And it's just something that just properly interests me. And I'm very lucky because I think there are people doing PhDs on things, you know, particularly when they've joined a project, a funded project, with a pre-existing brief. So, you know, the student kind of joins a team to answer a question that they haven't themselves set. Philosophy is hard. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like, philosophy is like proper hard, and I'm not someone who needs to be seen as like some kind of genius. Like, when I was at Oxford, I was doing a master's in ancient philosophy. Christ, I can't tell you how toxic the philosophy department in Oxford was. Unbelievable. People took themselves so seriously. And one thing that I just want to say is part of just my way of being in philosophy, being a philosopher, whatever you want to call that, is just keep it in perspective. Philosophy is really cool and really fun, and as a thing that you can be doing for fun, as a hobby, as a way of understanding your place in the world or just the world. You know, it's brilliant. But seriously, I swear, there needs to be just more irreverence in philosophy. People just need to stop taking themselves so bloody seriously. Because honestly, those people not only ruin it for themselves, I'm sure, they ruin it for a lot of other people who are choking on the sheer lack of oxygen in the room because these people who are taking themselves so frickin' seriously are sucking it all in, leaving none for the rest of us. Anyway, ran over, God. So I know that in my last video I was talking about things that I might want to do after philosophy, and I was talking about law and possibly converting to law. One thing that concerns me in moving from philosophy to a discipline like law is that I feel, or I suspect, law breeds a kind of status anxiety or an identity anxiety in a similar way to what philosophy can do to people. People can get very anxious about needing to be seen as a philosopher. In philosophy, the way that this can play out is, especially if you're a male student, you might grow a beard, you might start dressing in tweed, you might try to approximate the image of an Oxford Don from the 1950s. And I worry that in becoming a lawyer, one inevitably has a similar kind of image consciousness, which is something that in moving away from philosophy, I absolutely do not want to find myself falling into. One thing that I find actually quite claustrophobic about academic philosophy is that there is this phenomenon which has a positive side as well, but it's this idea of what a philosopher looks like. From my not particularly in-depth but averagely sufficient research about law and legal professions, is that there is a unanimous idea of what a lawyer looks like. For women in particular, this is kind of like designer label power dressing. To me, this doesn't carry much value for me. If I were to convert to law and pursue this route, I don't want to get caught up in the image consciousness of law, because I'm truly not interested in issuing one identity, namely academic philosophy as an identity, and picking up a different identity. I don't want to live my life anxious about how I come across, and I've lived with too much anxiety in my life to want to do something where I can't be more myself. I'm not saying, of course, that I expect any kind of professional job to let me turn up in my, Lululemon sports bra. I get it. That's only going to be possible if I remain on the kind of freelance track. I just wanted to have more clarity about what it is I want in pursuing a career after my PhD. I think it's like anything, like in relationships. If you've had any experience with other people, particularly with romantic others, in bad relationships or any kind of romantic experience, it's not necessarily that you come out of those experiences knowing what you do want from a partner. So you don't have a kind of positive set of qualities that you're looking for necessarily. It's more like there's a set of negative characteristics that you're seeking to avoid. And what I don't want from my professional career is to replicate various problems that I've encountered in philosophy as a vocational career. I don't want to reproduce them or be sucked into them in whatever career is coming next for me. Those are my current reflections on post-PhD career options. Maybe I should do a Q&A so I can actually sit here and answer questions people want to know the answers to, rather than me talking about lawyers and an image problem. I don't even know if anyone actually gives a shit about that. I'm not really sure what I'm doing. I will see you soon. Cheerio, bye!